Fascinating glimpses of Egypt. Apart from the incredible temples that we visited, so many charming vignettes come vividly to my mind. The first evening in Cairo, we went to the huge bazaar, the famous Khan el Khalili market, which was a kaleidoscope of images etched in my mind. Hundreds of shops jostled with each other, all selling jewelry, clothes, artifacts, souvenirs, spices, and so on. The smells, the tastes, the colorful dresses, the girls in burqas, so many wonderful things. We were grabbed by a young man as soon as we entered and dragged to his stall, which he proclaimed was the best. Needless to say, all of us come to his pleas and bought a lot of unnecessary trinkets. The coconut water seller, who offered us the best thing to quench our thirst. The sweet potato vendor, who was baking delicious sweet potatoes on flaming coals. We tried them all, not knowing how to avert their endearing pleas. Suddenly I found myself surrounded by a bevy of belles. They were so beautiful and insisted I take photos with all of them. This was a grand introduction to our wonderful tour. The next vivid scene was a horse carriage ride to the temple of Edfu. The muddy streets, the smell of the horses, the drivers dressed so flamboyantly, each one haggling and trying his best to persuade the guide that his carriage was the best. Some of the horses looked so skinny and bony that I really felt sad for them. Some, however, seemed quite well fed. They snorted and whinnied as we set off at a spanking pace, raising a cloud of dust in our wake in front of us. A felucca is an ancient wooden boat with sails. Once, on one of the days, we had piled into one and sailed off into the very heart of the sunset. It was such a glorious experience. The river shimmered and gleamed with the rays of the setting sun. The old sails of the boat flapped in the wind. Far off from the shore could be heard the call of the muezzin calling the faithful for salat. The boat was manned by a Nubian who was tall and dark and wore a white robe and a turban. We jumped into the bow of the boat so as to face the sun as we sailed towards it. Little children, not more than 10 or 12, paddled their tiny canoes with their hands or with small rubber flaps and came towards us. They sang pop songs very sweetly and begged for money. How could we disregard them? This is something which used to happen very often. They would come to our big boat and paddle along the sides, sometimes far below, at least 20 feet, when we were on the big boat. They had such lovely voices. They did not really ask for anything. They just sang and waited in the hope that we would give them something. They were the children of the river and totally fearless. This is another aspect of Egypt. We never saw a beggar anywhere, but everywhere went, hordes of children and men and sometimes women would come with all sorts of enticing articles for sale. They would run after us if we were walking or follow the boat in their own little boats. I know that some people found it irritating, but somehow my heart went out to these little kids and the older people. They were poor, but not so poor as to beg. Of course, bargaining was a kind of game. If they sensed you were an American, they always doubled their prices. They guessed I was Indian and would always ask, "Indian?" When I nodded, they would say, "For you, special price." Whether you bought or not never mattered. They were always smiling and courteous. I felt so touched and wanted to buy everything, especially from the children. Luckily, I did not carry money with me, so I just had to satisfy myself from patting their heads and saying no money. One of the interesting places we were taken to was a huge perfume shop where we were allowed to dab a number of perfumes on our hands in order to find out which we liked. Of course, we had only 2 hands, and my head was reeling by the time we finished sniffing, and my hands smelt like a flower garden. At the end, everyone was given a discount if they wanted to buy. They had lots of methods by which everyone felt that they were getting a great bargain. Perhaps I was only the one who never bought anything. But the whole shop was beautifully decorated, so I kept myself busy by wandering in and out of the exotically decorated rooms into which different groups were taken to smell the perfumes. What captivated me was a place where there was a glass blower who was making these exquisite vials for the perfumes. This was truly worth the tour. The whole thing looked so simple, but was obviously extremely difficult. The way he blew into the molten glass making different shapes of bottles, the way he broke off the stems of the vials, his concentration, were all fascinating to watch. Everywhere we went, we were told about the papyrus reef on which all the ancient records were written. I was very anxious to see this plant. Since no one else was interested, the guide stopped for a short 10 minutes at one of the big papyrus stores. Just a few of us rushed in and were stopped short by the magnificent array of papyrus paintings and writings. There was hardly any time to see much, but I asked to see the plant, of which they had a few pots. Apparently, this plant grew only in the north, and that is why we had not seen anything of it. Then we approached a girl who showed us how the blades of this grass, the papyrus grass, were used to make the scrolls and paintings. It was a very long, drawn-out process, and it was fascinating to watch. Of course, from the very first day, we had been warned by our guide not to fall for the copies of paintings made on plastic by the Chinese, which flooded the markets. Another memory was a visit to the Nubian village. The Nubians are a very ancient tribe that existed in the Sahara and later spread to Egypt. They were known for their expertise in archery. They had their own villages along the Nile and were also known for the number of handicrafts they made. They are very tall and dark as compared to the Egyptians. Unfortunately, their original village was inundated when the Aswan Dam was built, but they were all resettled in another village with more modern amenities. This was the village we were taken to. The boat ride was unforgettable. Small boat weaving in and out of the numerous clumps of grass which might have been tiny islands. The hot sun above and the glistening waters below. The water birds and the gentle gurgle of the river were all indelibly printed on my mind. The Aga Khan had built his tomb on the banks. There were also some fabulous hotels along the river. Then at last we came to the pier, which was a place where people would go out of the boat and be taken on donkeys to the village. But we, however, were taken to the main pier, which led straight to the village. As usual, the path was lined with shops filled with the most exotic items, all made by the Nubians, by the village folk. We were told to keep going till we reached a typical Nubian house. It was most unusual. It had a big sort of living place with thatched roof and a showcase of small crocodiles that you could take out on the palm of your hand and get yourself photographed. The crocodile, as has been mentioned before, is worshipped in many places. These small little ones looked quite helpless, and I felt a lot of sympathy for them. The kitchen was on one side and some small bedrooms on the other side. They kept bringing drinks like hibiscus and mint tea and various snacks. The two women of the house were so hospitable and insisted that we try everything. I peeped into the kitchen and saw that they did have some modern conveniences like a sink and a tap, etc. I was really happy for them. After that came the usual scurry of shopping all the way down until we reached the boats. The boat ride back through the reeds and rushes was always a delight to me. One of the amazing things we did was to watch as a huge boat, the Esmeralda, went through a lock by which we were lifted up through various methods until we reached the river, which was higher on the other side. If the lock had not been there, the boat would have been tossed here and there due to the difference in the heights of the water as the river came speeding down the hill. The grand finale of our trip was the experience of the hot air balloon. This is something that has to be experienced to be believed. Though I have seen photos of them, I never knew how they worked. It was our last day in Aswan, just before we took the plane to Cairo. We left the boat with our luggage at 5 a.m. in order to catch the sunrise. It was an incredible experience. We were taken to a huge ground. There must have been at least 20 to 25 balloons, colorful balloons. Some were being blown up, some were already airborne, and some were still in a state of collapse. They are really enormous and could seat 30 people at a time. They had huge gas flames which blew hot air into the balloon until it stood up like a mushroom. Then all of us had to clamber up into the big baskets by a small step ladder. We were told to hang on as the balloon slowly rose up into the sky and gently flew over the Valley of the Kings and all the different temples we had visited. But what was the greatest experience was the fact that on one side we saw the sun rising in the east, and on the other side the full moon setting in the west. This was really a bonus that Vanamali had given us. I'm sure none of us had planned the trip that way. It so happened that the full moon was the previous day, and we could see the incredible landscape of sun and moon, one rising and one setting. We couldn't have asked for a better end to our incredible Egyptian trip. The ending, however, was hilarious, since they could not control the landing stage. It could land anywhere over the sandy landscape. Ours landed on some fields. As it landed, many boys were running after it to pull it to a stop. Otherwise, it would have kept bouncing all over the field. Getting out of the basket was another feat, but that was not the end of the adventure. We were still far off from our bus, which would take us to the airport. No ordinary car could navigate this track through the fields, so we had to hop on to a tractor-like truck, which was no doubt used for transporting hay and field workers. This was truly another adventure. With some help from the boys, all of us managed to hop on this strange mode of transport and get to the main road in one piece and to our bus, which took us to the airport. This whole incredible trip would not have been possible without the help of dearest Nistala and Nakula of the Ananda College in the Ananda village near Nevada City, USA. Egypt had always been on my list of favorite places to visit, but somehow, though Vanamali has taken me to so many unique places, he had left out Egypt. It was only at the ripe age of 84 that he chose Nistala and Nakula to be the divine instruments in giving me this rare opportunity to visit this holy and ancient civilization. All those who came on this miracle trip were, I feel, chosen by him with great care. Each and every one of them were gems in their own way. The Sanatana Dharma insists that satsang, or the company of the noble-minded people, is the best way to approach the divine. Indeed, in these 10 days, we were always having satsang. Every single one of the group was so courteous, unselfish, and helpful that it was indeed a lesson to all of us in humility and acceptance. We had time only for one actual talk as such, which was really in the form of a Q&A. But as I said, I felt that we were really learning so much from each other, and the guide, and the waiters, and the children who came rushing around at every moment. There was a leap in the level of our consciousness. The Egyptians have an ingrained culture which still exists in their genes, even though they may not consciously be aware of it. Our guide himself was a perfect example. He was ever ready to offer help to anyone who needed it, and steered us in and out of the complexities of Egyptian life with the greatest of ease. The Nile was a holy river of the Egyptians, similar to the Ganga for Hindus. She also had a great part in giving us this feeling of riding on the crest of a wave of divinity. As I sat and looked at her from the deck of the boat, I felt that she was indeed talking to me through her ripples and her gentle sounds, and her many children who were always paddling up and down her waters. Indeed, they were all children of the Nile. She was the artery of ancient Egypt. The only country would never have existed without her. How many stories would she tell if she had the voice? Actually, the first thing I noticed in our ride from the airport to the hotel was this fascinating river. We asked the driver to stop and leant on the railings and looked down and drowned in the glory of her everlasting waters. I prayed to her on that day to help us through our incredible journey and allow us to delve into the numerous mysteries of this ancient land, of which she alone was the sole and surviving witness. On the last day when we left our boat, the Esmeralda, I looked back at her and thanked her for having fulfilled the promise she had made on that first day and given me this indelible experience, which was etched on the wall of my mind like the hieroglyphics on the walls of the temples. When we parted at our last dinner in Cairo, everyone felt a tug in their heartstrings when we thought that the next day we would all be scattered in various parts of the globe and would not meet at breakfast as we normally did. I can only end this with a prayer, asking Vanamali to bless all those who came with us on this trip, as well as the country and people of Egypt. Ma el Salama. Aum Tat Sat. To thee I give my salutations. O Krishna, O Krishna,
Aum